So one of the things that we cover on this podcast is we talk about people from the Muslim world who are trying to bring about these changes in their society. So these are, and you mentioned some of them in your book. You had a section on the humanist movements and secular movements in the Muslim world, and some of the thought leaders that are currently leading it. One of them was
including you,
including me, and thank you
Yes.
for that. I appreciate that. We recently had Mariam Namazi, who you also mentioned in the book, on our podcast. And she's a founder of the Council of Ex-Muslims of Britain, and she has witnessed this organization mushroom. It's starting in 2007 with just a handful of members, to now there are tens of thousands of members worldwide. She also told us, and I agree with this. She said that the internet is doing to Islam today what the printing press did to Christianity in the past. And so you wrote about how the Muslim world sat out the Enlightenment process largely a couple of centuries ago, and how Muslims, compared to Jews and Christians, tend to be more religious and take their scripture more literally than other religions. But do you think that a Muslim enlightenment, an enlightenment in the Muslim world, is possible now, considering how far we've come since the Salman Rushdie days a few decades ago?
Absolutely, which is not a prediction that it's going to happen anytime soon, but we can be surprised. But certainly in the long run, it's just hard to imagine that that the Muslim world will stick with the various really medieval practices in a globalized world where ideas flow across borders, where the same forces that eroded ecclesiastical authority in the Christian world are operating today, and as you mentioned, the internet means that they're operating at even faster timescales. Also, there's a really significant generational turnover. If you look at changes in attitudes, particularly liberalization, by which I mean women's equality, tolerance of homosexuality, bringing up children to be autonomous and creative as opposed to obedient, favoring democratic participation in institutions. Every region in the world has shown an increase in these what are sometimes called emancipative values. That's a term from Christian Welzel of the World Values Survey. Now, there are big differences between regions. Not surprisingly, Western Europe is the most liberal, and the Middle East and North Africa the least liberal. But two really significant trends are happening. One of them is that they're all increasing over time, even though there are differences among the world's regions. The other is that the liberalization is more pronounced if you compare one generation with another than if you look at attitudes within a given generation over time. Now, both of them are becoming liberal, but the generational turnover is probably more profound, and it is happening in the Muslim world. So that I had to blink when I looked at this graph, because it seems incredible to believe, but the attitudes among young Muslims today are more, on average, are more liberal than attitudes in Sweden and the Netherlands in 1960. Now,
Wow.
now that might just seem, there's got to be an error there. But when you think about it, if you were to go back in a time machine and ask a Swedish gentleman in 1960, what do you think about the idea of two men getting married? You would have said, "Are you nuts? That's inconceivable. That's against nature. It's against Christianity. I'm Christian." Right. So it reminds us that attitudes really do change, and I suspect there's a lot more even happening in more confidential private arenas than in the public arena, because there's also so much overt oppression.